The stadium was alive, trembling under the weight of 50,000 bodies moving as one. The noise wasn't just sound. It was a living, breathing organism. Waves of screaming fans rolled up into the night sky, ricocheting off steel beams and floodlights, pressing back down like thunder trapped inside a concrete shell. Every chanted his name, Michael, 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 was a hammer strike against the stage. Michael Jackson stood at the center of it all, a lone figure bathed in an almost divine glow of white-hot spotlights. His sequin jacket caught the beams and shattered them into fragments of light, a kaleidoscope that danced across the crowd like falling stars. He moved with the effortless precision that had defined his entire career. The glide, the snap, the tilt of the head that seemed to pull screams out of throats like a spell. The band behind him hit their marks flawlessly, each beat of the drums echoing like cannon fire, each guitar riff like lightning in the dark. He was mid-song, one of the classics, the kind that ignited hysteria the instant the first notes hit. Thousands of fans mouthed every lyric in perfect sync, their voices fusing into a deafening choir. Some were crying. Others were clutching their friends, their arms, their hearts, unable to believe they were standing this close to him. For a moment it felt eternal. Michael at his peak, commanding the stage like no one else alive could. And then it happened. Without warning, Michael stopped. It was subtle at first. He turned his head, his body falling slightly out of rhythm with the pounding groove. A sharp gesture of his gloved hand, small, almost imperceptible, signaled the band to cut. The musicians looked at each other, uncertain, but obeyed. The sound collapsed all at once. Drums silenced, guitar strings dead, horns muted mid-breath. The thundering anthem of joy fractured into silence, so abrupt it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the building. The only sound left was the echo of the crowd. 50,000 voices that had been singing seconds ago, now clashing in confusion. Gasps, questions, scattered laughter. Michael stood motionless, center stage. The spotlight burned down on him, outlining his frame in stark white, his shadow stretching long across the platform. His chest rose and fell, sharply, visibly. His head was bowed slightly, curls of dark hair falling over his forehead. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dance. For the first time that night, for the first time in memory, Michael Jackson had frozen. The audience thought it was part of the show. He was a master of surprise, the king of stagecraft. Maybe this was a dramatic pause, a lead-up to something spectacular. The seconds ticked by, and fans waited for the beat to drop, for him to launch back into choreography with a signature spin or a high-pitched hee. But nothing came. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. Even the roar of the fans began to weaken, replaced by a low murmur. People shifted in their seats, glanced at each other. A mother in the front row leaned down to ask her daughter if the sound system had broken. A group of teenagers farther back started chanting Michael, again, hoping to trigger a response. But on stage, Michael didn't so much as flinch. From behind the curtain, crew members peered nervously. His dancers exchanged wary looks. This wasn't choreographed. This wasn't planned. Michael finally lifted his head. His eyes, usually so alive with fire when he performed, scanned the crowd with something else, something fragile, almost haunted. His lips parted, but no words came. He inhaled sharply, microphone catching the breath, amplifying it into the stillness. A sound so human, so raw, it made the crowd collectively hold theirs. Then came the moment that would echo forever. Michael whispered, just loud enough for the mic to catch. Stop. One word. A command, but not to his band, not to his dancers. It was to himself, to the night, to the overwhelming tidal wave of expectation crashing down on his shoulders. The crowd erupted again, not in cheers this time, but in bewildered noise. Some clapped nervously. Others shouted questions. What's happening? Is he okay? Camera flashes popped like fireworks, capturing his still figure frozen under the light. Security guards shifted uneasily, not sure whether to intervene or stay back. Michael lowered his microphone slowly, his arm trembling slightly as it fell to the side. His entire body seemed smaller now, diminished under the vastness of the stadium. And yet, paradoxically, The silence gave him a gravity no performance could. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't singing. He was simply standing. And 50,000 people couldn't look away. It felt like an eternity. In reality, it was less than a minute, but time bent in that space. Every second stretched, elongated by confusion and disbelief. A murmur began near the back, swelling forward like a wave. What's wrong with him? Others hushed them, unwilling to break whatever fragile thing was happening on stage. A few fans, tears streaming down their cheeks, clasped their hands as though praying. Michael tilted his head back, looked straight up into the blinding lights above. His eyes shimmered as if fighting something unseen. Then he closed them. For a heartbeat, the entire stadium seemed to close its eyes with him. The king of pop had stopped his kingdom mid-song, and nobody knew why. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, charged, alive. Something was coming. Something bigger than choreography, bigger than spectacle. Everyone could feel it. All they could do was wait. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. Hours before the world froze with him, Michael Jackson had been unusually quiet. Backstage, the air was a mixture of nerves and routine chaos. Dancers stretched in the corridors, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Technicians barked to one another over radios, adjusting spotlights, checking the voltage of amps, running last-minute sound checks. Normally, this was the kind of atmosphere Michael thrived in. He was famous for being meticulous, for fine-tuning even the smallest details, lighting cues, camera angles, the timing of a single footstep. But tonight, he sat alone in his dressing room, back pressed against the wall, staring at the floor as though it were a cliff edge. His longtime bodyguard, Bill Bray, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You good, Mike?" he asked in that gruff but loyal tone. Michael didn't answer immediately. He blinked slowly, hands resting in his lap, gloved fingers drumming against one knee. When he finally looked up, his eyes were distant. 50,000 people out there, he whispered, all of them looking at me, waiting for me. Bill gave a short nod. They've always been waiting for you. Since you were a kid, that was the problem. Michael had never known what it was to not be watched, to not be expected to deliver. Every stage, every spotlight, every gaze had followed him since he was 5 years old, a child pressed into fame like a diamond formed under pressure. His life had been measured in applause, his worth weighed in ticket sales and chart positions. Tonight was supposed to be another triumph, another testament to his reign. But instead, it felt like a trial. Sometimes, Michael murmured, I wonder if they love the music, or just me being something I'm not. The words hung in the air, and Bill didn't know how to respond. He had guarded Michael against paparazzi, against mobs of fans, against stalkers. But how did you guard him against himself? Out in the hallway, Karen Fay, Michael's makeup artist and confidant, peeked in. She had powdered his face, brushed his hair, applied the stage makeup that would shine under the floodlights. She knew him better than most. Michael, she said softly, you don't look excited. Usually before a show, you're buzzing. Michael forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm just thinking. About what? She pressed gently. He hesitated. About whether I can still give them what they came for. About whether I'm enough. Karen's heart tightened. She had heard him talk about perfection before, how every note had to be flawless, how every dance step had to strike like lightning. But this sounded different. This sounded like fear. Hours bled into minutes, and soon the stage manager was knocking. 5 minutes, Mr. Jackson. The words hit him like a countdown to judgment. He stood, smoothed the sequin jacket over his shoulders, and looked at himself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was dazzling, iconic, untouchable. But Michael didn't see that. He saw the shadows under his eyes, the slight tremble in his lips, the child inside who still longed for peace. He pressed both hands against the counter and whispered, Be perfect. They need you perfect. Karen, standing nearby, shook her head almost imperceptibly. No, Michael, she said under her breath. They just need you. Backstage, as the show began, he walked to the tunnel that led to the stage. The roar of the crowd built, like a tidal wave. His dancers lined up behind him, electric with anticipation. Crew members slapped his shoulder, shouted encouragement. "Let's go, MJ. Light it up." But each step forward felt heavier, like his shoes had been filled with stone. The sound of 50,000 people chanting his name wasn't fuel. It was pressure crushing his lungs. He glanced to his left and caught the wide eyes of a young dancer, barely 20, looking at him like he was a god. The thought nearly broke him. He didn't feel like a god. He felt like a man drowning in expectations too vast to swim through. Then came the lights. The stage erupted in brilliance as he stepped out. The crowd detonated in screams, banners waving, flashes popping like firecrackers. And for a fleeting moment, he managed to slip into the rhythm. The music pounded. His body remembered its lines, his voice soared. But inside, something clawed. Every face in that crowd felt like it belonged to a jury. Every cheer sounded like a demand. The song he was singing, one he'd sung 1,000 times before, suddenly felt like a lie. His voice cracked faintly in his own ears, though nobody else would have noticed. His chest tightened. His heart raced. He thought of his father, of the endless rehearsals, of the voice that had drilled into him since childhood. Do it right. Do it perfectly. Or don't do it at all. The memory hit him harder than the spotlight. And right then, mid-song, mid-step, Michael's mind whispered, "I can't." The band kept playing, the dancers moving, but Michael's world narrowed. The walls of the stadium closed in. The noise of 50,000 voices melted into one endless roar. He looked out at the sea of faces and felt naked, exposed, fragile. He raised his hand, cutting the music. The stage fell into silence. The audience didn't know. They couldn't know. But backstage, those who had seen his trembling hands, his quiet unease, weren't surprised. They had seen the cracks. Tonight, for the first time, the cracks reached the surface. Karen would later say she knew the exact second it happened. His shoulders dropped, she recalled. "That's how I knew. That was the moment he stopped being Michael Jackson, the performer, and started being Michael, the person. And he didn't know what to do with 50,000 people staring at him like that." Bill Bray, standing by the curtain, felt the pit in his stomach grow. I'd seen him exhausted. I'd seen him sick. But I'd never seen him scared on stage. Not once. Until that night. Back in Act 1, when Michael whispered stop, the world gasped in confusion. But Act 2 revealed the truth. This wasn't a malfunction, a stunt, or a technical glitch. This was the culmination of years of weight pressing down on a single man, until the only thing left to do was break the silence with honesty. And now, the question lingered in the air, what would he do with it? For a moment, nobody in the stadium knew what had just happened. 1 second Michael was mid-song, spinning through a note every fan in the building had been waiting to hear. And the next, silence. His raised hand, small but commanding, had cut through the air and stopped the entire machine cold. 50,000 bodies froze with him. The stage, so often a place of seamless illusion, had suddenly become vulnerable and raw. The band glanced at each other, unsure whether to keep going or trust the signal. They knew their leader. They had toured the globe with him. Michael never missed a cue, never flinched, never broke character. Yet here he was, standing stock still in a blinding cone of light, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. At first, the crowd filled in the silence with their own voices. Cheers, shrieks, the ever-present Michael, chants. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a trick. He's going to do something crazy. One fan shouted at her friend, clutching her glittered sign. This is part of the act, you'll see. But as the seconds passed, the atmosphere shifted. 15 seconds. 20. The noise lost its edge. Curiosity sharpening into confusion. Camera flashes continued to pop, catching image after image of a man who looked less like an unstoppable icon and more like someone trapped. A ripple of murmurs spread across the arena. What's happening? Is he sick? Is this real? The dancers, frozen mid-position at the back of the stage, glanced uneasily at one another. One of them whispered through clenched teeth, "Do we move? Do we keep going?" No one dared break the tableau. If Michael wasn't moving, neither were they. Michael's body language said everything. His shoulders, usually square with confidence, had slumped. His free hand, the one without the microphone, trembled almost imperceptibly by his side. His chest rose and fell too quickly. He wasn't playing. He was fighting something. The arena's sound was no longer a collective roar. It was fragmented, whispers, coughs, nervous laughter, like 1,000 small conversations colliding in the air. The energy that had been one unified tidal wave now fractured into uneasy ripples. Then his voice broke through, soft, strained, caught by the microphone that amplified across every inch of the stadium. I can't. 3 words, barely audible yet deafening. Gasps rippled through the stands. Some thought they misheard. Others pressed their hands to their mouths. The words replayed over the speakers, echoing into the concrete and glass until there was no denying it. Michael Jackson had said he couldn't. The band froze. The crew froze. Time itself seemed to freeze. Backstage, panic flickered like a flame. The stage manager fumbled for his headset. What's going on? Is it medical? Do we pull the curtain? But no one moved. All eyes stayed locked on the man at center stage. Michael stood with his head bowed, curls falling across his face, the microphone shaking slightly in his hand. The spotlight felt hotter than fire. His ears buzzed with the sound of 50,000 people breathing at once. His heart pounded so violently he thought the mic would pick it up. He whispered again, voice cracking, I can't do this. This time, the words were unmistakable. A stunned silence fell. The audience, for once, didn't know how to respond. Some clapped in an awkward attempt to encourage him. Others booed, mistaking the vulnerability for theatrics gone wrong. Most simply stared, wide-eyed, waiting for the moment to resolve. From the third row, a teenage fan named Angela gripped her best friend's hand, so hard her knuckles whitened. He looked scared, she whispered. Her friend nodded, eyes wet. High up in the bleachers, a man pulled out his phone, filming the scene with shaky hands. He'd come expecting moonwalks and pyrotechnics. Instead, he was capturing something far more fragile. This is history, he muttered to himself, though his voice trembled. On stage, Michael's bandmates exchanged glances. His musical director mouthed silently, Do we stop the show? No one answered. All they could do was watch him wrestle with something invisible. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2, 3. In the world of performance, where every second is scripted, rehearsed, and delivered on cue, 3 minutes of nothing felt like eternity. The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between empathy and impatience. Some chanted his name again, louder this time, desperate to pull him back into the performance. But it didn't work. He wasn't Michael Jackson, the performer, anymore. He was just Michael, overwhelmed, trembling, human. From backstage, Karen Faye later recalled the moment. I saw his face on the monitor. He wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking through them, like he wasn't sure if he could survive the weight of all those eyes. I wanted to run out there and hold him, but I knew I couldn't. He had to decide. Bill Bray stood frozen at the edge of the curtain, fists clenched. Boss! He muttered under his breath, though Michael couldn't hear. Don't let them see you break. But that was the point. They already had. On stage, Michael finally raised his head. His eyes swept the crowd, glassy and wide, vulnerable in a way no spotlight had ever revealed before. He brought the mic back to his lips, and this time his voice was steadier, though laced with pain. I don't know if I can give you what you want tonight. Gasps again. Some fans shouted encouragement. Yes, you can, Michael. We love you. Others simply cried. Their idols stripped of the armor they thought was unshakable. For decades, Michael Jackson had been untouchable, a myth in sequins and gloves. Tonight, on that stage, in that silence, he was achingly real. The stadium hung in suspense. 50,000 hearts caught in a silent standoff. Would he walk off? Would the show end here? Or would something else, something unplanned, something raw, emerge from a pause? Nobody knew. All they knew was that they were witnessing something unforgettable. The silence was suffocating. 50,000 people had come expecting spectacle. Explosions of light, dance moves sharp enough to cut air, a voice that could soar above anything. Instead, they sat in an arena holding its breath. Michael Jackson, The man who seemed untouchable had just whispered words no one could believe. "I can't do this." At first, the weight of it pressed down like a storm cloud. Some fans folded their arms, restless. A man near the back shook his head and muttered, "This has to be some weird act." A few boos scattered like pebbles tossed into the air, quickly drowned by shushing. Nobody wanted to be the one to turn on him. Not really. But the confusion lingered, buzzing through the audience like static. On stage, Michael stood motionless. His sequin jacket glimmered in the spotlight, but his body seemed small, fragile, his head bowed as though the weight of 50,000 eyes might crush him. His microphone hung loosely at his side, catching nothing but the faint sound of his breathing. And then, like a spark in dry grass, it began. A woman in the front row, her hands trembling, cupped them around her mouth and shouted, "We love you, Michael." Her voice cracked, but the sincerity was unmistakable. A few heads turned toward her. Then another fan, this time a young man, standing on his chair, threw his arms up and yelled, "Take your time." The words cut to the tension, not as demands but as gifts. Encouragement, not expectation. Michael's head lifted slightly, just enough to glance toward the source. His eyes glistened. From there, the wave began to spread. Clapping started, slow, steady, not the usual thunder of applause, but something more like a heartbeat. One pair of hands, then two, then 10. Soon, an entire section of the arena was clapping together, not to cheer him back into performance, but to anchor him in the present. You're safe. You're not alone. Michael. Michael. Fans chanted again, but this time the rhythm was softer. Not the desperate plea of an audience demanding a show, but the chant of a congregation rallying behind their leader who had faltered. Tears began to ripple through the stands. People hugged strangers. Some swayed, holding up signs they had made, their glitter letters catching the light. One in bright blue read, "You are enough." Backstage, Karen Faye pressed her hand to her mouth. She had been terrified this would end in disaster, that the audience would turn cold, that tabloid would spin it as weakness. But what she saw unfolding on the monitors was something different, something she had never seen in all her years with him. "They're holding him up," she whispered. Beside her, Bill Bray shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, voice rough. "They're not walking out. They're not angry. They're there with him." On stage, Michael blinked hard, fighting the tears welling in his eyes. He had expected disappointment. He had braced for rejection. But what washed over him instead was love. Pure, uncomplicated, unconditional. He brought the microphone to his lips, though his hands shook. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You're still here?" "Yes," came a unified roar. The crowd answered back like a chorus. "We're here, Michael. We love you." The noise was no longer demanding, no longer frantic. It was steady, warm, and strangely gentle despite its volume, like a blanket wrapping around him. From the nosebleed to the front row, a collective decision was made without words. If Michael Jackson couldn't give them perfection tonight, they would give him something greater. Permission to simply be human. Some fans began waving lighters, the tiny flames flickering like fireflies. Others lifted their phones, screens glowing, turning the arena into a galaxy of soft light. Together, they created a sky for him to look up at, a reminder that he wasn't facing them. He was surrounded by them. Michael's lips parted. He whispered into the mic, "You don't want me perfect?" A girl's voice rang out, clear and piercing. "No, we want you." The stadium erupted. Applause, tears, chants. The transformation was complete. The band, still frozen, exchanged glances. His musical director leaned toward the horn section, whispered, "Wait, let him lead." Dancers shifted out of their poses, lowering their arms. For once, they weren't background performers. They were simply witnesses, sharing the stage with a man breaking and healing in the same breath. Michael placed a hand on his chest, as if steadying his own heart. The tears that finally fell down his cheeks sparkled under the lights. For the first time in decades, he wasn't playing a role. He wasn't performing Michael Jackson, king of pop. He was just Michael, a man overwhelmed by love he didn't know if he deserved. In the stands, fans began to chant something new. It's okay. It's okay. The words rose in rhythm, filling the arena with reassurance. Michael's knees buckled slightly, and he leaned against the mic stand, overcome. Karen, watching from backstage, wiped her own tears. Later, she would say, I think that was the first time he believed they loved him. Not the image, not the perfection. Him. Bill Bray turned away, his jaw tight, hiding his own emotion. They won't let him fall, he muttered. Michael raised the mic again, voice fragile but clearer now. You're teaching me more than I could ever teach you. A roar of approval swept the stadium. Strangers hugged. Strangers cried together. The night was no longer a concert. It was communion. What began as a silence of fear had become a chorus of compassion. 50,000 people had made a choice, not to abandon him, not to demand from him, but to lift him. The cameras captured everything. Later, clips would circulate endlessly. The moment the king of pop broke down, and the moment his people caught him. Some would call it the most human moment of his career. Others would describe it as a miracle. But in that instant, it didn't matter what history would call it. All that mattered was the here and now. Michael Jackson, trembling, smiling through tears, standing under a blanket of love thicker than any spotlight could ever shine. The standoff was over. The silence had been broken, not by music, but by compassion. Now the question was, what would Michael do with this gift? For a long moment, Michael just stood there, hands trembling around the microphone stand, eyes sweeping the ocean of faces before him. 50,000 strangers, united in a single truth. They weren't leaving. They weren't demanding. They were here for him. Michael's lips parted, voice barely above a whisper. You stayed. The stadium roared back, but not with the frenzy of earlier cheers. This was different. Steady, warm, a tide of reassurance. We stayed. We're with you. Always. He closed his eyes. The weight on his chest loosened, just enough to let him breathe. For years, he had carried the suffocating burden of perfection, convinced that if he faltered even once, the world would turn on him. Tonight, in the silence of his collapse, the opposite had happened. They hadn't abandoned him. They had caught him. Michael leaned into the microphone, his voice breaking but audible across the hushed arena. I need to tell you the truth, he began, his words shaky but resolute. I walked out here tonight, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. And then I looked at you, all of you, and for the first time, I didn't feel like Michael Jackson, the performer. I felt like Michael, the person. And I got scared. Gasps, then silence. Every ear strained toward his voice. But, he continued, his voice growing steadier, you showed me something. You showed me that I don't have to be perfect. That you don't love me because I can hit every note or dance every step. You love me because I'm real. And that, his throat tightened, he let out a shaky laugh. That means more than you'll ever know. The crowd erupted, cheers, tears, chants, we love you, raining down like confetti. Michael turned toward his band, giving them a faint nod. But instead of signaling a return to the setlist, he whispered something into the mic, words only they could hear through their monitors. No, not that one. Something different. Something honest. The band members exchanged looks, then slowly adjusted. The pianist laid his fingers across the keys, striking the opening chords of a song that wasn't on the program. A song Michael rarely performed live anymore, but one that tonight carried the weight of truth. Smile, the old Charlie Chaplin ballad he had recorded years earlier. The crowd quieted instantly, recognizing the melody. Michael closed his eyes and began to sing. Smile, though your heart is aching. His voice cracked on the first line, but it didn't matter. If anything, it mattered more. It wasn't flawless Michael Jackson. It was human Michael, trembling but pushing forward. His words weren't just lyrics. They were confessions, carried on a melody fragile enough to break, yet strong enough to hold 50,000 souls in its grip. As he sang, fans lit their lighters again, a sea of tiny flames swaying in unison. Some cried openly, shoulders shaking, mascara running. Others sang along softly, as though afraid to overpower him. The stadium became a cathedral, and Michael's cracked voice was its hymn. Smile, even though it's breaking. When he reached the chorus, he pulled back from the mic and let the audience carry the words. 50,000 voices lifted the song into the night air, filling every corner of the arena. Michael pressed a hand to his chest, tears running freely now. He looked less like a superstar and more like a man being saved by the very people who had come to watch him. Karen, watching from backstage, sobbed openly. "I'd seen him perform 1,000 times," she would say later, "but that was the first time I saw him heal on stage. And it wasn't through perfection. It was through honesty." Bill Bray, hardened and stoic, turned his back to the monitors, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "They'll never forget this," he muttered, "and neither will he." As the song ended, Michael let the final note linger, his voice fading into the echoes of 50,000 fans singing it back to him. He lowered the microphone, bowed his head, and whispered into the silence, "Thank you." The applause that followed wasn't the deafening roar of spectacle. It was thunderous, yes, but laced with something deeper: respect, reverence, love. Michael raised his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. He had stopped the concert mid-song, frozen under the weight of expectation. But now, because of the compassion shown to him, the show wasn't broken. It was reborn. He stepped back to the mic one last time. "I came here tonight thinking I had to give you everything, but you gave me something instead. You gave me the courage to just be me, and I'll never forget this night as long as I live." The audience erupted again, chants of his name reverberating across the stadium. He didn't return to the original set list. Instead, he performed a stripped-down sequence of songs, ballads, softer numbers, songs chosen not for spectacle but for sincerity. Every lyric carried new meaning. Every note touched with the vulnerability of what had just happened. Fans later said it felt less like a concert and more like a conversation, an exchange of love between one man and 50,000 people. The media would debate endlessly afterward. Some called it a breakdown. Others called it the most authentic moment of his career. But for those who were there was no debate. They had witnessed something unforgettable. The night Michael Jackson stopped a concert mid-song, not because of failure, but because of honesty, and in doing so, created a performance that transcended music. One fan summed it up perfectly in an interview years later. "I came to see Michael Jackson, the superstar, but what I got was Michael, the man, and it was the most powerful show of my life." As the final encore faded and Michael left the stage, he paused in the wings. He looked back at the sea of lights, the lingering chants of his name, and whispered to himself, "They stayed, even when I couldn't." And with that, he walked off into the night, not as the flawless king of pop, but as something rarer, a man who had been vulnerable in front of the world and loved even more for it. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.